and welcome. This is Steffi, and today on the show I have a very special guest. So, you all know that I was part of the founding team member of Umbria Network, a super fast and super cheap cross-chain bridge, basically the most convenient bridge for transferring your assets across chain, EVM compatible chain right now. And one of the partners of Umbria is Fantom. So I decided to reach out to the CEO of the Fantom Foundation and get him on the show to discuss what is all about Fantom, why it's considered one of the most reliable and stable blockchain. And also, we kind of nailed down some very interesting use case of blockchain technology they are not discussed enough. So here is my conversation with Michael Kong, CEO of the Fantom Foundation. But before we get into the interview, I want to make sure that you know that we don't give any financial advice on this channel, but only information, and anything to do with your investment decision or anything regarding cryptocurrency, you need to make your own research. And it is important that you skill up, because we do believe that crypto is the future and there is a massive value that blockchain technology can bring to different kinds of industry. But you need to understand. You need to understand the fundamentals. You need to understand the terminology in order also to better understand the conversation that we are having, for instance, on this channel as well. So go and skill up. And if you are not subscribed to our YouTube channel, click the subscribe button now and follow us on social media to stay updated with our news and interviews. And if you have any comment, feel free to add them to the comment section on our YouTube, or reach out to me via email at steffi@financialfox.news. I hope you enjoy this interview. I'm really excited to have this chat and discuss the Fantom project. So tell me a little bit about Fantom Foundation and about yourself, and what do you have to do with the Fantom project?
My role is more as like a CEO nowadays. I'm very much focused on the business aspects, doing a lot of administration work behind the scenes, doing a lot of public presentations like today and elsewhere, and also focusing on overviewing like the technology developments and making sure that it kind of like aligns with like our business development goals.
I was reading on your website, so Fantom is always online and process transaction very fast, like multiple transaction at the same time, using a kind of like high-speed innovative consensus mechanism. And this is a lot of word that maybe people don't remember, but translated means a better performance and better scalability. So how Fantom achieved that, and how is different from other blockchain out there?
Very good question, and that's a question that I could definitely go into a lot of detail about. But I just want to try and keep it like simple and just like say kind of in general like how the technology works, right? So kind of like after the ICO happened around mid or June 2018. We basically spent like a year and a half with a new development team coming up with a technology solution that we kind of described during the ICO. So we had to come up with something that was, obviously like fast and scalable compared to the existing technologies that were out there. Also open source, meaning that anyone could like look at the code base, transparent and contribute it. And also what we call permissionless. And what we mean by that is that anybody around the world can join and leave the network at any point in time. There's no gatekeepers, there's no like foundation that's telling people like who can join and who can't. There's no like council or predefined nodes that can like permit certain transactions or not. It's pretty much open technology platform for anybody to use. And of course, it also had to be secure, meaning that obviously the network couldn't be quote unquote hacked. In other words, people just can't come in and submit like double spending transactions, so spending the same kind of like coin twice, performing a transaction, or just arbitrary reverse transactions. And the way we do that is quite complex. But essentially what we've done is create a system where we can process transactions asynchronously, right? And the technology term that we use is called ABFT, or asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance. And basically what it means is that we can process multiple transactions simultaneously. So instead of just processing, say, like one block at a time, unlike Ethereum, where one block gets confirmed by the network, and then another block, and then another block, approximately 12 or 13 seconds later on average. For us, we can process, say, 3 blocks at the same time, or maybe 4 blocks at the same time, or maybe 5 blocks at the same time, depending on the level of network usage at a particular point in time. And so intuitively, you can kind of figure out that, if you're processing, say, 3 or 4 or 5 blocks simultaneously, you're going to you're able to process more transactions than if you just process one block at the same time, right? And so we've created technology where parts of the network are able to confirm different blocks at the same time, leading to higher network throughput. And we're able to do it in such a way that the nodes can communicate with one another. So there's what we call fault tolerance, right? And by fault tolerance, we mean that if part of the network were to go offline at any point in time, and parts of the network go offline all the time, right? Nodes go offline, to upgrade, nodes go offline, to restart if they encounter some sort of syncing problem. Nodes go offline and restart just kind of arbitrarily if there's an issue, say, with a particular data center. What's important, though, is that even if part of the network goes offline, that the transactions can still run, that the network can still run, transactions can still be processed as if nothing has happened. And so we created kind of a proof of stake system where the nodes are continuously voting on what transactions to include in blocks, such that if part of the network were to go offline over time and restart, that the network still operates as intended.
So let's talk a little bit about the application that has been built using the Fantom technology. And, I would like you to mention a bit about DeFi and NFTs. Obviously, DeFi looks to me, because the network doesn't go online, it looks a very good use case. But I think something else that I would like to kind of dive a little bit are other use cases like insurance, like supply chain management, like smart cities, that we don't talk very much about these use cases, but I think they are very interesting. So if you can help me to kind of give our viewers a bit more insight in what a blockchain like Fantom can do, I think that would be great.
I mean, you mentioned already some of the use cases for the Fantom network, namely like DeFi and NFTs. And I think the biggest use cases for blockchain technology nowadays, from what I can see, is really DeFi and NFTs, right? And by DeFi, we mean all sorts of different applications, like being able to swap assets, P2P via smart contracts, one token to another, being able to lend and borrow, etc. And by NFTs, a broad category, we're talking about people uploading all sorts of different content, which they can buy and sell digital representations of physical items, and also nowadays in-game items as well. But I do think, as I mentioned in a variety of different other interviews, there are a whole bunch of other use cases for blockchain technology, both in a P2P manner and both also in a more enterprise manner, that I think are going to be really, really big use cases for blockchain technology that haven't really been extensively used at the moment. I mean, these other use cases have been used to some extent, but not to the same extent as, say, DeFi and NFTs on chain. So regarding insurance that you mentioned there, it's been something that I've been talking about a lot. The whole idea about us being able to set up a P2P insurance platform, and essentially how that would work briefly is that you would basically have a smart contract which kind of acts like a DAO, one of these decentralized autonomous organizations. Basically, it means that participants can participate in this smart contract, can communicate with one another, and basically be able to self-insure themselves. So individuals will come together, say friends and family and yourself, you'll put funds into the DAO or the smart contract. The smart contract could invest the funds in the DAO to generate returns for the people who participate in the DAO. At the same time, therefore earning actually returns on the premiums that are paid to the sale. At the same time, if there is like a claim that is made, then the other participants in the smart contract can validate the claim and see whether it's like legitimate or not, and what the appropriate claim is. And that's a very, very powerful potential use case for blockchain technology for a number of reasons, right? One of them being is that it's very efficient because you reduce a lot of third-party costs. You don't need to have big insurance companies and these big organizations validating claims all the time. It's done more on a localized level. And another benefit for that is that it kind of removes the moral hazards of insurance. There's a lot of problems with insurance in that when people claim, they tend to claim, not all the time obviously, but they tend to claim, depending on the circumstance, more than what was the damage was actually caused to, say, their vehicle, right? And it's a very, very common thing across, say, motor insurance. And that's because you're interfacing with a big insurance company. And the big insurance company, is kind of like separate from the people who are actually making the contributions to the insurance company. Whereas if you're making claims directly against like friends and family and people that your reputation at stake, people will know how much they've contributed. The people who are contributed to who are contributing potentially to your claim are people that and people that and they know the direct cost to them, right? And so that kind of incentivizes people to behave in a much better manner. It incentivizes people not to try and claim for more than is absolutely necessary, and to add as much evidence for the claim as possible, since they've been evaluated by their peers. So I think that leads to a lot of efficiencies, reduced costs, and increased returns also for the policyholders.
Let me stop you here because I do agree with you. I mean, it will be really disruptive for the insurance industry. But how do you see the big insurance company in the Web2 world to kind of be disruptive by this new model, Web3 model? I mean, can they adapt, or their destiny is to die?
I think there definitely is a role for them. I don't think the whole concept of P2P insurance can replace all kind of insurance claims. I mean, there's a variety of different insurance claims out there, and for a variety of like use case and also regulatory reasons, I don't think like all insurance could basically be done in a peer-to-peer manner. So like, what kind of insurance policies I think could be done peer-to-peer? I think ones that are around like, say, home and contents, or like motor insurance, ones that kind of have less regulatory hurdles than other kinds of insurance are probably like easier. Ones that are kind of easier to provide evidence of your claims probably could probably work best. Whereas like other insurance, such as particularly healthcare insurance, because the industry is so regulated and because there's so many requirements regarding health insurance, I don't think that's practically possible that you'll be able to create a P2P model for healthcare insurance. Also, the data that you're kind of dealing with in healthcare insurance is a bit more sensitive and private, and a bit more complicated to evaluate than, say, data around like, a vehicle damage, right? So for example, like when you're designing like a health insurance policy for someone, you usually need to like find out a lot about their health conditions. Are they a smoker or not? Do they have, what's their kind of like health history? So it requires a lot of information from the user. When it comes down to, say, a vehicle, it's really like, okay, here's the vehicle, here's kind of like the data around the vehicle, and that's basically it, right? And so if you come into like an accident with a vehicle, you can provide evidence of that accident. You can provide photos, you can provide claims, you can provide quotes, etc. It's more difficult when it comes to health insurance. One, because of the regulations, and two, also because, okay, so you're claiming for a particular condition. How much does it cost to have the condition? What was the probability of you getting that condition in the first place? It just requires like a lot more information that requires, say, like an actuary to really evaluate like what the proper pricing is. And actually, that's one of the disadvantages of peer-to-peer insurance, is that actuaries exist because they're specialized in being able to accurately price policies for individuals. In a peer-to-peer setting, you would have to include actuaries in some cases, depending on the nature of the insurance. And I don't know exactly how you'll be able to do that. I think it's also possible for big insurance companies to be able to create these peer-to-peer networks and kind of like manage them and earn a return on them. I mean, it might cut into the earnings as a whole, but at the same time, it might also significantly reduce the cost, because instead of them having to evaluate the claims themselves separate from the people paying the premiums, they will now be able to include people paying the premiums in the claims evaluation as well. So I definitely don't think big insurance companies are going to go away anytime soon. I do think that many insurance, there are many types of insurance that will still require them, and I think they can also participate in many ways in the P2P insurance marketplace.
Yeah, exactly. And will be up to them to move fast and embrace, the latest technology. Okay, let's talk about supply chain management that I'm quite interested.
A lot of people like don't really like to talk too much about supply chain management, at least when it comes to um, the public, just because it's kind of seen as kind of like boring and not really much a very interesting use case. It doesn't sound as exciting as like for example, like NFTs or gaming, but it is like a very very important use case. The supply chain is something that everyone depends upon. We all buy goods from around the world. Um, you know, Foods, etc. And where like blockchain technology can really come into supply chain management has to do around data validation or around the validation of particular parts of the supply chain process, right? So a simple use case could be when you're going through the supply chain process of getting, say, a good delivered, right? There are stages of the good being delivered, right? First of all, it's like the good would be sent from the producer or the seller to a warehouse. Within the warehouse gets maybe distributed to a local distribution center, and then from the local distribution center, it might get delivered to your house, right? And so at each stage of the process, it is possible that you could have, say, a physical label on the good where you scan that information and you hash it or you encrypt it and you put it on the chain, right? And what I mean by that is that there is technology where you can translate data into this encrypted format. So when you look at it on the chain, you can't decrypt it and figure out what the original data is, right? So it's privacy preserving, right? So they won't have your name, they won't have your address, they won't necessarily have the name of the good or the service in the company, etc., right? But what it does mean is that someone down the line in the supply chain process, if they wanted to validate that the information was checked out, that the information is correct, then they can hash the information that they have and compare it to the hash that exists on chain. And if the hash exists exactly, if the hash matches exactly what is on chain, then you know absolutely for sure that that the data you're reading from the product is 100% correct. Mathematically, that is the case, right? So what this use case means is that you're able to validate data a lot more easily than, say, in traditional technology space, for a number of reasons. And one of them, it comes down to security, right? So if you have all this data in a single database, someone could go in there and steal the data, manipulate the data, and so you don't really have a clear record of like each step of the production process, right? But if you hash the data on chain, then you do have a copy of that data, because you can validate against data in the existing database to see if it's still consistent with what's on the chain. Because if it isn't consistent with what's on the chain, then you know that some part of the production process has not worked out, right? And then you can kind of like dive in and figure out, okay, like at which point did the hashes not match up, if that kind of makes sense. So you can validate a lot of data when it comes to supply chain management. There have been a variety of different use cases done. For example, there's a company called Everledger that has done diamond certification and via this like sort of method. And so there are a lot of important use cases around supply chain management. We also did this for example, in Afghanistan. We put labels on around 30,000 products. We put them in pharmacies in Kabul, and people scanned them to make sure that the information was valid of the actual generic drug itself, because there's a lot of counterfeit drugs that exist, unfortunately, in Afghanistan. Now that project isn't running anymore, obviously, because the Taliban's in charge. We're doing absolutely no business with the Taliban. But suffice to say that people were using the product. We did get thousands of scans, and so people were making sure that the product that they were getting was actually genuine, that it wasn't a counterfeit product. So you can track all sorts of things via supply chain management.
And I think one of the challenges is actually getting this hardware, because you mentioned about the data, having them on chain, that's great, but you need to kind of have a link to the physical product, and what kind of hardware do you use that can't be counterfeited? That's the big, the big question about, using supply chain to kind of trace diamond or trace food or trace, luxury handbag or watches, is that what is the best hardware that can be counterfeited?
Exactly correct. So there's a variety of like different like physical solutions depending on what you're looking to get. I mean, to be honest, you don't necessarily even need to have like any physical changes to the item. You could have a case where at each point in the supply chain process, someone needs to type in the data of the product, and then it'll get hashed in the software, and then it will automatically through the application talk to the smart contract and see if the hashes match up. That being said, it is easier in most cases to add like some sort of physical label. So like, for example, like what we did in Afghanistan is that we partnered up with a labeling company out of Nigeria called Checkit, Chekkit, right? And they have a relationship with a German manufacturer that manufactures, say, RFID tags, right? And then so the RFID tags, the data, there's data associated with the RFID tags. That information is encrypted. You can create a hash out of that, put that on the chain, and then the RFID tag is attached to the physical product itself. It's kind of like a little label that just gets attached to the product itself, right? And so each stage of the production process, someone can scan that product and see the context of the information and kind of validate the information against the hash that's on the chain, as I described previously, right? And so, like in the case of what we were doing in Afghanistan, is that these drugs were being imported from India, and during the production process, labels would be added to the products, and then they were stocked in pharmacies in Kabul, right? And so users would be able to download an app, and then use that app to basically scan via the camera the like a QR code, reading in the information from the tag, right? And then to be able to check that the information was valid or not. And this also gives you the ability to kind of extend the functionality just from like validating the product, that you can also add surveys in there, you could add all sorts of like different marketing information. So it goes beyond just like validating information. But that's like, for example, like a specific use case on how it would actually work. So depending on the use case, you can have a physical label. You don't necessarily need to, though. It really depends on what product you're exactly talking about.
Yeah. It makes sense for some product that, it's not just, it doesn't really work to have something that, is microscopic, is a physical label. But let's move on to smart cities, because that's also a very interesting use case that, we hear many people talking about smart city at maybe IoT or artificial intelligence or mobility. But, I think there is much more that a discussion that we can have, unlocking the value the blockchain technology can bring. And I would like you to kind of give us some insight on this topic.
When it comes to like smart cities, to me that's kind of like a bit of a catch-all term. Like it's a term that like a lot of people like to use, but what exactly is like smart cities, right? And I think smart cities comes down to like using IT technology to create like a more efficient city, right? Or to be able to create more efficient ways of people being able to interact and communicate with one another when it comes to living in like a city-based environment. So it comes down to, for example, like more efficient transport, right? It comes down to more efficient like traffic system, right? It comes down to like more efficient infrastructure, and being able to like collect more data on particular points of infrastructure and being able to use that data in a particular way. And there's a variety of like different technologies that can be used to kind of like achieve those sorts of solutions. When it comes to like blockchain technology, I think it's still very exploratory stage, just like how blockchain technology can be used for smart city environments. I know there are proposals out there about creating these products that Internet of Everything products, adding sensors, etc., and then putting that information on chain so anybody can kind of like read the information from the chain. Is publicly available. There's a full audit trail. the information is secure because it's validated by multiple computers. It's not validated by a single computer. I do think that it is potentially a very powerful use case. I think one of the problems in order for that adoption to happen is, one, obviously being able to like educate enterprise, educate businesses, educate governments that that such a use case is real and is possible. And I think the second problem is the technology is not at a scalable level enough to be able to handle that amount of data. Because when you're dealing with IoT devices, they're always continuously reading in data, right? And they're always sending data to a database and being processed. Well, because blockchain technologies are not very scalable at the moment, although I think the technology will improve over time, it means that the amount of data that can actually be processed from IoT devices is very, very limited. So it's definitely not technically possible, in my opinion, to be able to run, a large IoT network and be able to like validate that information and put it on the chain for anyone to look at. I think it's just like too much data at the moment. I think there will come a point where it will become a lot more efficient, become a lot more possible, but I'm not sure that if it's going to be scalable enough on such a large scale that it will really be able to incorporate that much data. I mean, there might be some IoT use cases, but I can't see that being, for example, like 1 million sensors around the city, just sending like 1 million requests to the network every single second with a lot of data. It's just a bit too much for the network potentially to be able to handle.
Awesome. Listen, anybody that is interested in getting in touch with the Fantom Foundation, I mean, you mentioned about the watchdog, which is very interesting because I'm sure there are many developers out there they need to audit their project, but how they can find you? What's the best channel to reach out to the Fantom Foundation?
If you go to our Twitter at FantomFDN, that is where you will see the latest updates. And you can also like message the account directly on Twitter. If you want to reach out to myself via email, it's probably best. And that's on mk@fantom.foundation. And also, if you want to find out more information about the Fantom platform, the technology, about the sort of applications that exist on there, and more about the team, you can go to our website, fantom.foundation. And there you also see additional links to Twitter, to Telegram, to Discord, to a variety of different communities that we're engaged with. So those are kind of like the best resources if you want to get in contact with us.
Okay, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Again, like really appreciate the opportunity. I'm glad I could share like a few more updates as well on the horizon.